Let's talk to Harry Phibbs, columnist at the Conservative Home. Harry, very good morning to you.
Morning.
I've got this from Joe. He says, it does look like Starmer's damp course has well and truly failed, as the rot has well and truly set in. The only way to deal with this sort of rot is to rip it out. Unfortunately, if you wait 5 years to deal with this sort of rot, the damage will be irreversible. You know, whatever he does, Keir Starmer, he seems to create this kind of morass of nonsense around himself. Nobody, I think, has thought of what he did yesterday as a reset of any kind. Nobody thinks that the 5 pillars or the 7 sins or whatever they are going to make any difference. They're all sort of hopes rather than pledges. They're not really promises. What's he doing?
I would be surprised to come across anyone who says, woohoo, isn't this fantastic? Instead of missions, we've now got milestones. Yeah. Isn't that an amazing, fantastic breakthrough? And I'd be surprised if anybody thought that the constant stream of announcements about we've got a new commission for this, we've got a new task force, we've got a new SAR, a new panel, a new commission, as a substitute for actually making decisions and having any proper ideas about how to fix the country. I can't imagine anybody feeling inspired.
Well, when you look at the faces of the front benchers who are watching him make the speech, they don't look particularly inspired either.
No, I've noticed in Parliament as well, Rachel Reeves has been looking particularly miserable. So I don't know how they'll be able to keep going for another 4.5 years. We have to see what happens. I mean, the housing one. I think one of the things they've done is to start talking about targets. Yeah. In their election, they were talking about promises, and I think that's been slightly downgraded. The language saying, "Oh, we've got this target; it's been very hard to reach." We've also got. It's also a bit of a schizophrenic government because although the rhetoric is pretty insipid, there is a discrepancy between that and what they're doing in that. The rhetoric is a bit more Blairite, is a bit more saying, yes, let's support business, let's celebrate success, we need to have wealth creation, that's the way to get economic growth. Whereas the policies, in reality, so far have been much more old Labour, adding regulation, more tax and spend, hobbling business and sabotaging any prospect of economic growth. So there's a complete discrepancy between what's promised and what's happening in practice.
Well, that's the problem. And, of course, the big issue which everybody wants to talk about and everybody needs an answer to is immigration. And that didn't really get a look in, did it? And there's a lot of criticism of that. No migration targets, nothing for defence, it says in the Daily Mail. Andrew Neil's commentary says it was as flat as a stale pint of beer. We're in for a grim 4 years with a talentless government stumbling from failed target to failed target. Nigel Farage was on Question Time last night, ripping to shreds the Conservative person on the panel, and Alistair Campbell and Jackie Smith, and actually getting applause for it, which is a brand new thing for me. I mean, it's almost as though Nigel Farage has sort of crossed the Rubicon. I don't know if you saw Question Time last night.
I saw clips of it on Twitter. I mean, Nigel Farage, it's obviously an extremely formidable figure. People assume that this is mainly a problem for the Conservatives. But I think probably we'll see Reform UK taking more votes from Labour, certainly traditional Labour voters. It's the lower paid who are hit by immigration, having their wages undercut. And those are people who would traditionally be Labour supporters. And in a lot of the places where Reform UK came second at the last election, it was to Labour in traditionally rock solid Labour areas. You know, kind of. Barnsley, Gateshead, Wigan, places that even under Boris Johnson in 2019 that Labour still won. So I think that Labour are foolish politically to be sort of dismissive of Nigel Farage and Reform UK and immigration as an issue.
Well, they're still kind of holding... But the trouble is they're still holding their noses about him, and so are some members of the Conservative Party as well. But, I mean, the bottom line is yesterday, you will have probably seen, Harry, that Reform are now running second in the polls to the Conservative Party, and Labour have dropped down to third, only, 5 months away from winning, a majority in Parliament.
Yes, and they're still being disdainful. But the immigration... We're talking about the housing and having this housing target of 300,000 houses a year, which if they hit that would be progress on what we've had before. It's normally been about 200,000 before. But in any case, if you've got huge immigration coming in, then that means that the housing shortage is going to, even if they hit their target, which nobody thinks they will, because they haven't actually put in place the reforms to increase the supply. They haven't actually reduced the bureaucracy that would be needed. But even if they did, that would be overwhelmed by immigration. So the housing shortage would get worse. Home ownership would become harder to achieve. Rents would become even higher. So to say that you can just ignore immigration and talk about these other things, of course, things like the pressure on the NHS and housing, immigration is a huge factor.
Well, it's a massive factor. Let's have a look at what Nigel Farage said about Keir Starmer's speech last night on Question Time.
So I sat and watched, listened to Keir Starmer's speech, and I was very pleased with myself. I managed to stay awake right until the very end, which, given how bland the delivery was, how scripted the whole thing was, how lacking in any sense of emotion or message delivery, was remarkable. The 6 milestones doesn't even mention immigration, the boats, or anything. And I actually genuinely think that the milestones will become millstones as they fail on every single one of them.
And just after that, the clip was cut short just a bit early, because the thing that I found astonishing, given that normal Question Time audiences are very, very Labour supporting, he got a massive round of applause and people were on his side. I think probably for the first time that I've ever seen a Question Time audience in support of him.
Yeah, no, normally you can reckon that a BBC audience is pretty unrepresentative, and also I think often it's the sort of lefties in the audience who'll make the most noise and be most assertive in it. So yeah, I think probably the thing you mentioned earlier was more significant of reform being in second place in the opinion polls. But no, he's had a good run, Nigel Farage. Obviously Donald Trump's election has, and him being best mates with Donald Trump has enhanced his status, and we'll see whether or not he gets any money from Elon Musk. But no, at the moment, Reform UK are in a very powerful position that they can challenge the failings of the Labour government, and Labour saying, oh, the Tories made a mess of it. We inherited a difficult time. Obviously, that doesn't dissuade people from voting for Reform UK. So
no, it doesn't. And the Tories have got a problem, haven't they? Because the Tories, at the end of the day, don't quite know yet exactly where they are. They don't quite know yet exactly what their vision is. I was talking to people last night at a party in Westminster, and they're kind of confused, I think, still as to where they're heading. They're not quite sure where they are on net zero. They're not quite sure where they are on immigration. You know, they need to kind of get it together and get it together quick, don't they?
I think Kemi Badenoch is clear what she believes. She does think that the net zero thing is a complete folly, and was one of the very few people to speak out against it when there was a great consensus. She is a proper conservative. She does believe in ditching all the woke nonsense, and she believes in...
Yeah, but not everybody in the party does. That's the point. I mean, she might be the leader who believes that, but, you know, let's not forget, you know, many sort of senior people in the party who might have been former MPs and who are not MPs anymore, but are still, you know, players, are still... There's still kind of a divided party, aren't they?
Well, there is that faction, but of course Robert Jenrick, who was the finalist standing against her, I mean, he was even stronger, saying, look, let's get specific about not just the principles, but let's withdraw from the European Convention of Human Rights. I think that will need to be a conservative policy by the next election to have credibility on issues like immigration. But I think that Kemi Badenoch will get them there. I think she is a true believer in the way that you know, some of the predecessors, you know, like sort of Rishi Sunak, Theresa May, to some extent Boris Johnson, you know, didn't have that clear belief. So I think it's a question of it getting across to the voters, which I agree will be a challenge. Certainly at the moment, when the voters think, well, look, you know, you come up with this stuff now, you know, why weren't you doing it in office. I think all she can do is persist in making her arguments and start to set out some specific policies and hope to gradually win back credibility.
Yeah, absolutely right. Good to talk to you, Harry. Thanks very much indeed. Harry Phibbs, columnist and Conservative Home.